Are you someone who thinks Formula One is wild right now, or that MotoGP riders are pure adrenaline junkies? Wait till you hear about Group B rallying. This era of the World Rally Championship was so insane, even the organizers said, "We went too far." All right, before Group B could happen, you have to understand the people running the show. The FIA, short for Fédération Internationale de l'Automobile, was and still is the main governing body for world motorsport. Founded in 1904, its job was to regulate international competition. But by the 1970s, the FIA had expanded its influence far beyond basic rules. It set the technical standards, enforced safety regulations, and oversaw everything from Formula One to endurance racing to rallying. At the time, rallying was popular, but not on the same level as Formula One. It was seen more as a rugged, adventurous side of motorsport, often associated with romantic images of drivers blasting through African deserts or frozen Scandinavian forests. The problem was, rallying was beginning to stagnate. Cars were fast, but not revolutionary. Manufacturers were involved, but cautiously. Spectators loved it, but the global attention, money, and television coverage were nothing compared to circuit racing. By the late 1970s, key figures inside the FIA, especially within the FISA division, which is short for the Fédération Internationale du Sport Automobile, the branch specifically overseeing racing, wanted to change that. They believed rallying had the potential to be a world-leading motorsport platform if it became more extreme, more dramatic, and more technologically advanced. One of the major architects behind this thinking was Jean-Marie Balestre, then president of FISA, a man known for both his political maneuvering and his appetite for spectacle. At the same time, manufacturers like Audi, Peugeot, Lancia, and Ford were pushing for looser technical rules that would allow them to showcase cutting-edge technology like all-wheel drive, forced induction, and lightweight composite materials. The car companies wanted rallying to be a public showroom for innovation. The FIA wanted rallying to be a global sensation. In 1981, they formalized their solution. New categories under the Group A, B, and C system. Group A would regulate production-based touring cars. Group C would govern endurance racing, like Le Mans. Group B would be the new wild frontier for rallying and some sports car series. And Group B was where they decided to throw out most of the traditional restrictions. The homologation requirement, meaning the number of cars a manufacturer had to build for public sale to compete, was dropped from thousands to just 200 units. The FIA also placed no strict caps on engine output, boost pressure, or materials used, other than basic dimensional and weight requirements. This new category was designed to attract radical engineering and major factory investment. If you think this is crazy, hit like and subscribe. You know, this is the kind of content that'll get you thinking. Drop a comment. I want to know what really triggered you about this. Internally, the FIA justified it as a way to fast-track the future of the automobile industry. Externally, it was sold to fans and media as the beginning of a new golden age of rallying. It was a calculated risk, one that both the FIA and the manufacturers believed they could manage. Nobody, at least officially, expected that by giving engineers almost total creative freedom, they would create machines so fast, so dangerous, and so uncontrollable that they would bring the entire sport to its knees in just a few short years. But, sadly, that is exactly what happened. They thought manufacturers would balance speed with responsibility. They thought the stages would remain safe enough. They thought spectators, used to standing dangerously close to passing cars, would adapt to faster machines. They didn't think hard enough. The rest is history, the bloody one we are about to unearth. Now, once the FIA announced the Group B rules, it was like the starting gun went off at a race no one had ever seen before. Car manufacturers didn't walk toward Group B. They sprinted like their lives depended on it. Because if you were a serious brand back then, you couldn't afford not to be part of the madness. First through the door was Audi. And they weren't just coming to play. They were coming to change the game. Audi brought the Quattro, a car that looked like it belonged in a Mad Max movie, except even crazier because this thing actually worked. It had something rallying had never really been seen used properly before: all-wheel drive. At a time when everyone thought all-wheel drive was too heavy, too complicated, and basically useless, Audi was willing to gamble their whole reputation on it. And it did work. It worked so well that it didn't just beat the competition, it embarrassed them. And it did, in spectacular fashion. The first versions of the Quattro were already fast, but then they started dialing it up. More power, more boost, more grip. By the time the Quattro S1 came out, it was a full-blown beast. Massive fender flares, giant front splitters, and a rear wing so big you could land a helicopter on it. Under the hood, you had a turbocharged inline-5 engine cranking out around 500 horsepower. And that wasn't smooth, polite power either. It hit like a sledgehammer. Turbo lag the size of a football field, and then bam, you'd get punched in the chest with a boost so hard it felt like the car might tear itself apart. But Audi wasn't the only mad scientist in the lab. Over at Peugeot, they were cooking up something sneaky. The 205 Turbo 16 didn't look like much from the outside. It was small, stubby, almost cartoonish. But under the skin, it was pure weaponized genius. Peugeot didn't just throw a turbo at it. They moved the engine to the middle of the car, ripped out anything that wasn't absolutely necessary, and focused on balance. The 205 was lighter, tighter, and could change direction faster than a politician during an election season. It didn't have fancy anti-lag systems like Audi's setup, so the drivers had to get clever. They left-foot braked and kept the throttle pinned at the same time, just to keep the turbo alive through corners. It was chaotic, messy, and if you nailed it, blisteringly fast. Meanwhile, Lancia, because Lancia never does anything halfway, decided to stick to rear-wheel drive for their 037. Most people would have told you that was a death sentence. I mean, all-wheel drive was clearly the future. But Lancia said, you know what? We'll just make our car so light and so responsive that it won't matter. And for a while, they were absolutely right. The 037 weighed less than most modern hatchbacks. It had a supercharged engine pushing around 300 horsepower. It was so agile that it basically danced through tight corners. The drivers didn't drive it. They wore it like a second skin. It's the last rear-wheel drive car ever to win the WRC championship. And honestly, it deserves way more respect than it gets today. But then came the real madness, the Lancia Delta S4. When Lancia realized that rear-wheel drive couldn't keep up forever, they unleashed a car that looked like it had come straight from a cyberpunk fever dream. The Delta S4 didn't just have one forced induction system, it had two. A supercharger for instant low-end torque, and a turbocharger for high-end top speed. It was like strapping a rocket booster to a cheetah. The Delta S4 could hit 60 miles per hour in under 2.5 seconds. And remember, we're talking dirt roads, gravel, snow, and cliffs. Not racetracks, not asphalt, actual wilderness. And it wasn't just the top-tier brands going nuts. You had Ford showing up with the RS200, a car that was so extreme it barely looked like it belonged on Earth. Mid-engine layout, four-wheel drive, turbo boost so savage it could snap your neck if you weren't ready. The RS200 was designed specifically for Group B. No compromises, no nostalgia, just raw, brutal performance. And it wasn't just the big names from Europe. Even smaller companies tried to get a taste. MG showed up with the Metro 6R4, a little boxy thing that looked like a go-kart, but packed over 400 horsepower into a tiny, twitchy frame. It didn't have a turbo, but it didn't need one. It revved to the moon and sounded like an angry chainsaw fighting a jet engine. Toyota showed up from Japan, MG from Britain. Renault wanted a slice. Hell, even Porsche toyed around with Group B weapons, thinking about how they could bend the rules in their favor. All of these machines were different shapes and sizes. Some were heavy brutes, some were quick assassins. But they all had one thing in common. They were so far beyond anything the sport had ever seen before that it made everything that came before look like it was in slow motion. And they weren't just fast in a straight line either. They could brake harder, corner faster, and accelerate out of tight bends like they'd been shot out of a cannon. If the track turned to gravel, no problem. Snowstorm? Still flat out. 1,000-foot cliff inches from your tires? Better keep your foot down or you'd lose time. Everyone with even half a dream of motorsport glory wanted to be part of Group B, because if they win, it would bring a lot of noise, the kind they could benefit from, the one about domination, to be legends. Who wouldn't want that? Hence, winning at any cost was everyone's aim. And then there were the drivers. To survive Group B rallying, talent wasn't enough. You needed almost superhuman reflexes, the kind you'd expect from a cat wired on 6 Red Bulls, and nerves stronger than titanium. Group B didn't forgive mistakes. There were no electronic safety nets, no traction control, no stability systems, no computerized aids whispering corrections in the background. It was just raw horsepower strapped into a lightweight chassis, and the driver's hands, feet, eyes, and instincts trying to keep everything pointed the right way. The physical and mental demands were brutal. Drivers faced everything from blizzards and icy hairpin turns to choking dust storms and searing desert heat. One stage might be a slick mountain pass in the Alps with sheer cliffs inches from the tires, and the next, a loose gravel fire road threading through dense forests. Visibility was often measured in feet. Reaction time had to be instant. One slip, one missed note from the co-driver, one wrong gear shift, and it could mean a rollover, a fireball, or a fatal plunge. There were times when spectators lined the course, often spilling into the road itself, leaving drivers with no clear path except a gap that opened at the last second. You weren't just racing the clock, you were racing chaos itself. The men who braved it became legends. Walter Röhrl, a towering figure at 6'5", was known for his precision and calm under pressure, famously saying he didn't fear death, but feared not being fast enough. Hannu Mikkola, nicknamed the Flying Finn, combined a smooth driving style with absolute ruthlessness when it mattered. Stig Blomqvist had ice in his veins, a master of Scandinavian flicks and sideways drifts, particularly devastating on snowy courses. Ari Vatanen was pure aggression, raw speed honed by unbelievable car control, a man who could dance a 500-horsepower beast inches from disaster. And then there was Henri Toivonen. If ever a man seemed destined for greatness but burned too fast, it was him. A legend whose final moments we're going to talk about soon. The machines these drivers handled were lethal, 0 to 60 miles per hour in under 3 seconds, even on dirt, with power figures reaching 600 horsepower in some cases. Weight barely scraped past 2,000 pounds. Turbochargers whined, anti-lag systems spat fire, and the brutal acceleration could tear chunks off the drivetrain mid-stage. There were no second chances. Every corner demanded absolute commitment, all while managing cars that could kill them if they sneezed at the wrong time. The thing about pushing limits is that eventually something has to give. In Group B rallying, a lot did. The cars were evolving faster than the technology around them. Tires shredded under the pressure, brakes overheated and failed. Drivers were pushed beyond the edge of human endurance, and yet kept going because backing off even slightly meant getting left behind. Add in virtually no crowd control, and it was a ticking time bomb waiting for the right spark. In 1986, at the Rally de Portugal, it finally exploded. By that year, the writing was already on the wall. Group B had become a monster, growing stronger and more violent with every race. The cars, lightweight and grotesquely overpowered machines, were breaking records and boundaries alike. Horsepower numbers unofficially crept past 500 and even 600. Weight dropped below 2,100 pounds. Aerodynamics were crude but effective. Boost came in with such ferocity that drivers described it like being kicked in the back by a horse. It was no longer just about skill, it was about surviving the machine you were strapped into. Drivers were under immense pressure. Pushing harder was not optional, it was survival. If you were not willing to brake 2 seconds later, flick the car sideways at triple-digit speeds, and trust your instincts completely, you were not winning. You were not even finishing. Meanwhile, the fans, tens of thousands of them, crowded the stages like human walls. There were no proper barriers, no fencing, barely any marshals. People stood just inches from the cars flashing past at 120 miles per hour. Some fans tried to touch the cars. Others darted across the road between racers, cameras in hand, gambling their lives for a blurry photo. Real footage from the time shows seas of people partying like waves at the very last second, barely clearing a path for the drivers. It was not a question of if something catastrophic would happen. It was a matter of when and how bad. At the 1986 Rally de Portugal, everything came apart. From the very first stage, the drivers were effectively racing through tunnels of humanity. At some points, you could not even see the course, just a mass of spectators spilling into the road. They were not just standing on the sidelines. They were on the apexes of turns, on jump landings, even sneaking blind over crests. Then it happened. Portuguese driver Joaquim Santos, piloting a Ford RS200, crested a hill at full throttle and was met by a wall of people spilling onto the course. It was too late to brake, too late to swerve. Santos barreled straight into the crowd. In seconds, the stage turned from a celebration to a nightmare. Screams, bodies flung through the air, panic everywhere. When the dust settled, 3 spectators were dead. 31 more were injured. Some would carry the physical scars for life. Many more would carry the memory. The reaction was immediate and absolute. Audi, Peugeot, Lancia, Ford, every major works team pulled out of the rally on the spot. No speeches, no politics. Just a cold, clear understanding. It had gone too far. Group B was not dangerous but cool anymore. It was lethal, and it was not just drivers paying the price, it was fans too. Portugal 1986 was not the final blow to Group B, but it shattered the illusion that rallying could keep escalating forever without consequences. It cracked the coffin open wide, and everyone knew deep down that the end was now inevitable. And tragically, the worst was still waiting around the corner. If the 1986 Rally de Portugal cracked the coffin open for Group B, Henri Toivonen's death slammed it shut for good. This was not just another accident. It was the moment the entire dream of limitless rallying collapsed, and it happened in full view of the motorsport world. Henri Toivonen was not just another promising driver. At 29 years old, he was already the heir apparent to the sport's future. Blessed with devastating speed, fearless car control, and a magnetic personality, he was seen as the next undisputed legend. Driving for Lancia in 1986, Toivonen had been commanding the World Rally Championship, taking the ferociously quick but notoriously difficult Delta S4 to new heights. The Lancia Delta S4 itself was a monster, emblematic of Group B's excesses. Twin-charged, fitted with both a supercharger and a turbocharger, it delivered over 500 horsepower. It could accelerate from 0 to 60 miles per hour in under 2.5 seconds, even on gravel. Built from lightweight composites like carbon fiber, Kevlar, and magnesium, the S4 had a brutally high power-to-weight ratio, but its construction made it extremely vulnerable in crashes. Toivonen had already won the 1986 Monte Carlo Rally in the S4, despite driving with the flu and a badly injured back. At the Tour de Corse, the grueling rally of 10,000 corners held on the narrow, cliff-lined roads of Corsica, he was dominating again. By May 2nd, halfway through the event, he and his American co-driver, Sergio Cresto, were leading by a commanding margin, more than a minute ahead of second place. Yet, there were warning signs. Toivonen had been complaining of feeling unwell all weekend. Dizziness, fatigue, a general sense of unease behind the wheel. He reportedly mentioned to team members that he felt strange, even suggesting the car was difficult to control. But in Group B, no one could afford to back off. Lifting the throttle meant falling behind. The pressure to push, even when not fully fit, was absolute. Then, during the 18th stage between Court and Taverna, tragedy struck. On a fast, flowing section of asphalt with no guardrails and sheer drops, Toivonen's Delta S4 went wide on a left-hand bend. The car plunged off the road into a ravine. The impact was violent. The lightweight bodywork disintegrated almost instantly. The underfloor-mounted fuel tanks ruptured, spraying gasoline over the wreckage. The car ignited within seconds. The fire was so intense that by the time anyone reached the scene, there was nothing recognizable left. Toivonen and Cresto were killed instantly. There were no eyewitnesses to the crash itself, no in-car footage, no definitive answers, only a column of black smoke rising over the Corsican hills and a numbing silence settling over the rally. Just like that. A split second that wreaked panic and heartbreak, and above everything, the loss of the very core of Group B itself, its identity. When the news spread, the entire motorsport world broke. Fans cried, drivers were devastated. Even the hard-nosed team bosses, the ones who had built these death machines, were shaken. Because deep down, Everyone knew. If a guy like Henri Toivonen, with all his talent, all his guts, all his control, couldn't survive in Group B anymore, then nobody could. In that moment, Group B became something more than dangerous. It was unforgivable. Henri's death wasn't just the end of a career or a season. It was the end of an era. The end of the wildest, fastest, most gloriously reckless chapter motorsport had ever seen. And even now, decades later, you can still feel the weight of it when you watch the old footage. Still raw, still unbelievably painful to watch. After Henri Toivonen's death, the FIA didn't debate. They didn't call meetings. They didn't wait for another tragedy. Within days, they made the call. Group B would be banned at the end of the 1986 season. Cars under development, like the Lancia ECV and Peugeot 405 Turbo 16, were immediately shelved. The dream of unrestrained rallying, of building the fastest machines human reflexes could manage, was over. Ask anyone who lived through it. Group B was the most thrilling racing motorsport that ever was. It was also the most terrifying, and without a doubt, it was the most tragic. Group B showed what happens when you strip away all the limits and just chase pure speed and power. It pushed technology forward by decades. All-wheel drive went mainstream. Turbocharging technology leapt forward. Car safety standards evolved at warp speed because of the hard lessons Group B taught the world. But the cost in lives and wreckage was enormous, and nobody who was there has ever really forgotten it. But it really did give birth to a whole new motorsport world. The one where everyone's concerned for safety more than winning even. Short answer? No, not a chance. Modern rally cars today are still ridiculously fast, but they're safe. They're loaded with crash cages, stability systems, GPS trackers, and emergency beacons. You can't go back to an era where every race felt like a coin flip between glory and death. Nobody, not fans, not drivers, not sponsors, would stand for it. But the legend of Group B? That lives forever. It lives in old YouTube footage, in the scream of a turbocharged Quattro, and in the memories of those lucky and crazy enough to stand on the sidelines and say, "I saw it, I felt it, I survived it." Yet the same legend has so much darkness pulling it down, it won't be resurrected. No, it can't be allowed to. Was Group B rallying pure skill or pure madness? Tell me where you stand in the comments. Smash like and share if you crave chaos. And if you think this was wild, wait till you hear about the Mercedes being too deadly even for pros to subscribe now.